Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Again, I'm Audrey. I'm an automotive writer for the Tundra. I'm very excited to be speaking to all of you today. So to begin, I'd like to just go around and have you guys introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit more about your background and what you've been up to, the organizations that you're a part of. I thought we'd start with Renee. So for those watching, Renee Brinkerhoff is a race car driver and the founder of Valkyrie Racing, and I'm sure you can take it from there.
Okay, great. I live in Denver, Colorado, and I started Valkyrie Racing, I think I was probably about 57 years old. I'm 65 now. And shortly after that, we started Valkyrie Gives, which is our philanthropic arm. And I do extreme rallies in a 1956 356 Porsche.
Wow. that kind of vintage racing must present a lot of challenges for you. I'm excited to talk about those as the conversation goes on. And then we also have Christina Nielsen, who's a professional performance sports car driver and the founder of Accelerating Change. Christina, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Yeah, I'm a professional race car driver. Been mainly competing in GT racing and sports car racing. A lot in the US. Have been, a two-time champion. Won that championship twice back in 16 and 17 in IMSA. Made history as a woman, and that kind of became a springboard for me wanting to engage more with women who were interested in cars or maybe were afraid of getting into it. And that's how Accelerating Change came about, together with Mariana Small, my business partner. And the main focus we've had is, I would say, track days. We do a lot of track days for women, cater to women, but we work with different partners such as BMW, Michelin, Porsche, companies who are all for engaging with the female demographic. So our goal is to continue to grow the community and have more women enjoy and realize their passion for being behind the wheel, which is basically what brings me to the track.
Yeah, I think that's something that we're all interested in getting into today. And then lastly, we've got Emily Miller, who's an off-road racer and the founder of Rebel Rally. Emily, if you want to tell us what that's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very fortunate that I got the opportunity to race for a legend and be trained by Rod Hall, who was the most winning off-road racer in the history of Baja, and was able to race in places across the globe, which he always said that the best way to see the world is from behind the windshield. And when I was racing, I really was usually one of the only women out there. You might have 300 to 500 teams out, racing in an event, and there might be only 1 or 2 women driving. And I'm also a coach. I've trained over 5,000 people to drive off-road, and then I learned navigation. I really focus on off-road racing, so it's great to see women who are out on the track. And this is a different discipline. It almost reminds me, I came from a background of skiing and cycling. They're line-picking sports, which is great. I find that women are great drivers, great navigators. And so I started the Rebel Rally. I also own a sports marketing company, but I started the Rebel Rally, which is the longest competitive off-road rally in the country. It is 10 days, 8 days of stages, no GPS, no cell phones, no support crews outside of our team. We have a staff, paid staff of almost 113 people. We build 4 base camps through the desert, and it's an extremely transformative journey for women, and also a great way to help kind of get them really passionate and excited about driving, which is great because everyone on the call feels the same way. And so I think this whole group is really helping to bring a lot of women into motorsports and lift them up.
Yeah, well, that's certainly something that Christina is doing with her organization as well, which is interesting. I know you have a family history in the sport as well, but I wanted to hear more about what got each of you into into racing and into motorsports. So Christina, would you say that besides having that history with your father, where there was like kind of like an aha moment where you were like, I want to do this too?
Actually, my dad has nothing to do with it. The first time I sat behind the wheel of a go-kart, I went a very traditional path, a little bit late for when most go-kart drivers start. I was 13. But yeah, I mean, I drove a rental go-kart. I loved it. Then I spoke to my dad about it, and you know, he helped me move forward. But yeah, he wasn't actually my first introduction to the driving side of karting. But yeah, I mean, I quickly fell in love with it. I thought it was so much fun. I played tennis at the time, which I never thought I was going to give up. Now I play it more as a hobby, but yeah, it was kind of love at first sight, if you can say that. And I think that's the case for most. I mean, accelerating change isn't about producing race car drivers. It isn't about you competing in IMSA, for example, or, you know, these really high level championships that I'm in myself. But it is more about being the springboard for getting women onto the track and helping them grow and push their comfort zones and at least getting started. Some of them might move to more, what's the word I would use? Like smaller championships, or, you know, smaller races, something that's more on a hobby level. But yeah, most of them don't go into racing, but it is about getting them on track and making them realize how great it is to be driving and doing this as something that's on the side for them of their normal job or their family, you know, whatever their priorities are and what they do every day. So yeah, I think there's still such a long way between just getting the first women on track and creating awareness about that. This is also doing the simple thing is doing a track day is also for women. And that's where we're the springboard. And essentially, there's been so much focus on always catering to the men among the manufacturers. I definitely see a change within this. And yeah, I'm super stoked that we got companies like Porsche, BMW, and Michelin who are for this mission and want to engage with the female demographic more. And we're sort of becoming that, like gapping that and being that bridge for them to connect with the female audience that we are bringing out. Because, you know, I think in the end, I wasn't ready to do something like this before I felt like I had the credentials. When I had established myself as a race car driver, this was the next right step and something that I can see myself doing beyond my racing career.
Yeah, well, there's definitely that disconnect, isn't there, of women thinking maybe that motorsports is too expensive of a hobby, something too where you have to go too all in and devote all of your energy to it, when there really are so many more practical applications. I know that's certainly something that Rebel Rally can teach women. Renee, I'm curious to hear if you've noticed that as well. It's kind of a field where people don't think that they can get into it first, and then you find that there are many, many good reasons to do so.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I didn't think I'd be racing almost 10 years later. It was something that I was doing one time to fulfill an obligation I felt I had to myself, because I'd been telling myself for decades, one day I'm going to race a car. And it was a very subconscious conversation, and I wasn't even aware of it. And one day I heard what I'd been saying and thought, this is not what I want to be hearing right now, because I just finished raising 4 kids and home educating them and giving up all my time and self-interest to do that, took it so seriously, and sort of put my own personal goals and ambitions and life zest as a young woman in a box, and didn't even really realize I was doing that. So when I realized I said this thing of one day I'm going to race a car, I had to go do it. But it wasn't something I thought I would continue doing. It was just like, I got to go do it, because for whatever reason I've been saying it, and then I'm done, and I'm going to go back enjoying having free time and developing hobbies and interests and doing things that I've been thinking about. And that was my race experience, that first race experience. Someone died the first morning. 2 or 3 days later, there were cars falling off cliffs and catching on fire and all this. I had no idea that the race I got in was the most dangerous tarmac rally race in the world. It's a very notable event. And I jumped into the deep end not knowing, and I had all these fears I had to immediately address, immediately push through and conquer. And it totally changed the course of my life. It brought out all these things about myself that had been dormant or I didn't know were there. And so here I am after all these years, but racing a car, and I didn't even know that car racing was a male sport. I never watched racing. I didn't know anything about it. I heard a word called NASCAR or Formula. I'd never watched any of those races. I didn't know about motorsports. So even when I went down there my first time, I didn't know until I got there that I was the only woman driving, and there were all these teams and all these cars. So that's how ignorant I was. And yet there was so much for me to absorb and to figure out how to navigate, how to drive, because the first time I went, I did both in someone else's car. I had no time to think about anything except for survival. And then I later realized, when I went back the next year with my car, and we made history in my car as a woman driver, and had all these things happen after all that. It was sort of a slow dawning of, this is a man's sport. And because I never felt treated differently. What I was doing was different than most arenas. I think for driving, it's not professional, so it's different. You get a lot of professional drivers that participate, but there's no money in it. So it's just people go to do this, to have this amazing, raw, extreme, dangerous adventure, right? So, driving a car is, you can do it in so many ways and experience it in so many ways. And racing, for me, once I had this transformative experience, I just said, I have to keep doing this. And so, yeah, we're here. We ended up taking the car from racing once a year in Mexico to just taking it all the continents. Car racing does something to anybody, male or female, right? Anytime you get outside your box and address your fears, you get change. So if you have any inkling to do it, man or woman, I think people should definitely get behind the wheel and get on the track with people like Christina or something and experience what that does.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it's really important that you bring up that you didn't know at first that you didn't have the view going in that it's this male-dominated sport, which freaks so many women out. I've heard Rebelle Rally described as an off-road rally that just happens to be for women. Why is it important to you guys to make that distinction?
Yeah, it's really important because what we wanted was a badge of honor. And basically what we didn't want to do is be seen as this like the women's rally or the little girls rally or rally light. And so what we did is we went out of the gate and just made it as hard and as extreme as possible in these remote locations, and it for so many days. And then if we had opened it up to everyone, it would have been filled up probably in the first day. We get called every day. I'm a man. Are you going to do another rally? Or when are you going to let, men compete? But the thing is and I've had women say, I normally don't do women's events. And then I say, well, would you have signed up for the Rebelle if it weren't a women's event? And these are like powerhouse automotive journalists. And they say, no, I actually probably wouldn't have, because of that intimidation factor. But what I want this badge of honor. I wanted to create something that the men wanted to do and the men respected as well as the women. And then it just so happens to be we're not beating the drum like this is a women's car rally, women's rights, etc. We wanted to create a funnel that was accessible. And so what we did is we broke down some of those barriers to entry. You have pooled mechanics, so everybody works with the same mechanics team. You gang those costs with the registration. We plan all the logistics. They can't bring support crews, so they're not having to coordinate that. And you make it a price that is similar to, let's say, a nice Hawaii or a ski vacation or a safari in Africa. It's kind of like a gateway drug for automotive. And we also, it's for stock manufactured vehicles. We did not want people to have a race car to do it. Managing the cost and the upkeep of a race car and a tube chassis vehicle is extremely challenging and expensive. And the vehicles that we already have are exceptional feats of engineering. And so we create, and we also made it to where it's not about speed. So that's another part of the funnel, but it's about efficiency. So you can reinforce great driving skills, really getting to know your car, doing it at a price that you can afford or attain or work toward, and that it feels accessible. And then just so happens to be for women. So I think that's probably the long version of the answer to that question. But I want that when you know, women say that they're proud to do it, and men say, "Oh my gosh, that is the coolest thing out there. Will you do that for, you know, for the men's market?" You know, it's pretty fun to hear that.
Yeah, I love that you use that term gateway, kind of like a gateway drug. I think that that's definitely the case when you're showing people skills that they can use with their own cars. But I am curious, I love hearing all these stories, but I'm curious to hear more about some of the obstacles that you guys have faced in building your careers. I know that these organizations did not come from nothing. What was the process like of building them and gaining support from the industry?
I actually think, you know, with what you just talked about, how you target the women, the experience that you aim to create, we're exactly the same, like completely aligned. You know, it's not a matter of like, is this like, you know, customized to women? Does it mean it's less? It's not as tough? It's not as difficult? It's not as challenging? No, not at all. It's just a matter of the perception in society that these things are done by men, and you need to cater to the women to encourage them to come and join these events, because they don't see it as an option for them. And it's something that they don't consider. And in the end, you know, we want them to consider it. I have women as well. Listen, I am all for it. I have never competed only against women. Like, motorsport is an equal sport. I compete against the men. I compete with the men. I have competed with a few brilliant women, but the majority are men throughout my career. And that's how it is. I like it that way. I'm looking for, I'm sure you are as well, being a springboard where the women tried with us and then they have the courage to go and join. Because I have women saying, "Oh, I don't want to go and do that. Like, women should be able to join the men's track day." It's not a question of whether it's the right thing or not to exclude the men from that specific day. It's a matter of actually giving the women the opportunity to realize that this is also for them. So, I mean, I completely agree with everything you said. Like, we run the same business model with our events and the same mentality behind it. So that's really awesome to hear. Sorry, I went a different route here. I was just very excited about what you were telling us.
Well, thank you. You know, I think when we've been in that experience, we understand as women what the barriers are to entry for women. And, you know, if I always say that if women represented 30 to 50% of the racing field, we wouldn't need to do these
We
things.
wouldn't have to have the events. No.
Exactly. And, you know, I've been called sexist for doing this. I'm like, well, you know, I remember 3 years I coached a program for Michelin and BF Goodrich where women could come and they were invited. And I didn't have a single woman participate in a program that they were offered to do for free for 3 years. And I say, well, they're not excluded, but they're not feeling included, or something's going on. So I do think it's important to have these funnels and these experiences, and women get very excited about it. We need to keep giving them these opportunities, but also let them understand that it is not easy. You've got to earn it. You've got to have the grit. Not everybody gets a trophy. The trophy is showing up and participating, and it's and like I said, you know, boy, you bring on 30 to 50% of the population, you know, out there racing as women, and we've made a huge impact.
Then our job is done.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's great.
No, the other thing I wanted to mention that I really appreciated, Christina, that you brought up is having the support of the manufacturers. And I just want to applaud them. We wanted to build a platform for the manufacturers' vehicles to shine. So it's not just for the women, but it's for the vehicle every day. You don't have to have a super, like uber expensive race vehicle to learn how to drive what you own well. And it's been great to see the manufacturers. Last year we had 11 participating manufacturers. We have multiple manufacturers as sponsors: Jeep, Kia, Lexus. We have programs with Ford, Toyota, Honda, Mitsubishi, Rivian. We have Nissan. Pirelli has been an incredible partner. It's really great when you can give that platform to them, but it's not, they want to do it not just because it's women. They want to do it because they actually believe in the totality of your program. It's a chance for their cars to shine and just so happen to be driven by women. And do they love the fact that they're supporting women and helping them? Yes, but it's in a very authentic way.
And let's, take a moment also to praise the men. I mean, I have plenty of men in my life who I can dedicate a thank you for in my career. Same with the partnerships that we've had for the events that we deal with in Accelerating Change. The instructors, our chief instructor, like there are several of guys who, have made an impact and have been a great part of our effort. So, I always believe, like in anything that I do, I try and align myself with good people. I think now we talked about obstacles, sometimes understanding who is a good match for you to work with, who has your back, who is trustworthy, who shares your vision. You have your strengths and your weaknesses. How does that person complement you in terms of strengths and weaknesses? So, definitely people skills, understanding who the right people are to work with, and moving forward with the people who are beneficial for you and where you bring something to the table and so do they.
That's good. Can I just dovetail into what you're saying? Because I have been one of those women of the mind of saying, it doesn't, the fact that it's an all women's event doesn't make me want to do it. In fact, my first reaction is, well, why do I want to do an all women's event? I want to compete in the full field, right? Mm-hmm. But what you're describing is really important, and giving those opportunities, whether it's what you're doing, Christina, or what you're doing, Emily, giving women an opportunity, because it really does take overcoming some hurdles that I think we have as women innate in us that we're not even always in tune with, where we defer to men, especially in arenas where they're typically more visible and more adept, or it's more oriented toward them. So if I have an opinion and they have an opinion, let's say if you're a woman and this is a quote man's sport, you may not listen to your own sense about it, especially if you're a newbie, especially if this is something new for you. You're going to probably rely upon what they're saying. And a lot of times it is because they're a man. They're a man and they have the experience and this is their arena, right? But if you do that and you have that kind of beginning in a sport, like a new sport or a new experience like we're discussing, I think that cripples you, and it gives you a false beginning, a bad beginning, an unhealthy beginning. So instead of like when in your event, your rally, they can learn to trust their own instincts, learn to have their own accomplishments, not listening to someone else's voice and relying upon it because it's a man. And it's not to prejudice men, and it's not their fault necessarily. Sometimes I have definitely had experiences where men, no matter if I've been on the podium more than they have, because they're a man, they feel they're right and they're pushing me to do it their way. But then I've had worked with men who have totally opened up the gates to let me learn everything and to explore together and for me to learn alongside them as a true mentor, and not as overseeing me in a sense of, it's more on an equal plane. So just hearing you guys has given me an appreciation for what you're doing and an understanding of really, it is sort of a aha moment for me this morning. It's really important, these opportunities that you're providing. And because there are just so many hurdles, and you're going to make them have success quicker and easier, that then they can build on that. And you're eliminating some of these other things where they might feel uncomfortable, where they wouldn't get involved or wouldn't push themselves. So taking that part out of it and then letting them explore and develop and learn, I am seeing the value. I'm seeing the value. I think it's important. You've won me over. I'm a true believer now.
Here's how I became a true believer. You know, I grew up all the time, you know, big brother pushed me since I was like, I couldn't come home. I couldn't go in for dinner until I threw like a perfect bullet spiral, like several of them in a row when I was 6, you know, I always raced against the guys, and I also competed in other sports and, you know, against guys, etc., or trained with them. And so what happened was I went over to Africa and I competed in an all women's event that I had found out about. And there weren't other Americans. There were about 130 teams of women. And my race boss encouraged me, because my plans were to race the cross country, FIA cross country world championships, which were all over Northern Africa. And I didn't have to take a support crew, didn't have to run a race car. I had support from General Motors out of Europe. So I went over and did this. I had podiumed every race that I had entered up until that time. And I got beaten. And boy, talk about humbling, because there's nothing tougher than to compete against a team, a field filled with smart, experienced women. You get out there off-road racing and the guys know that you're on, you can just push them. You can push them, you can sit on them, you don't even have to pass them. They know that the woman is right behind them. They start driving harder, their tactics, and then they get ahead of themselves. Their ego sometimes can get in the way. And women can be very strategic, especially when it comes to endurance events. And endurance events. You do endurance events and you have that, it's that chess game. And boy, like a whole bunch of strategic, amazing women out there. That's tough. And the other thing that I found is that I have so many great friends from overseas who I've competed against and I've competed with as teammates. And there's nothing better than having that circle of women with shared experiences in any sport you play, or in work and sport and friendships, and you kind of bench race with them. And it's just a very unique experience. The other thing too is that on the Rebel, you have a vibe out there where the women help each other even though they're competing against each other, because they know that they need to build those strategic alliances. Also, I wasn't even sure if I could get the permitting if I said I was doing a rally in America, because land management officials would assume it would become about speed. And the women are very good at following the rules, pushing the rules right up to them, but not crossing them, being very careful about protecting land. And not that men don't do that, but there tends to be a little bit different mentality. And I think that would change. I think that there's a chance that if we open this up to men, they'd probably come in, 75% of the field would break their cars on the first 2 days and then realize that it's not actually about speed, it's about strategy. And they would figure out how to become great competitors. I see this, and Christina, I'd love to hear it from you too, or both of you. When I train, you see this really well on the track. When you go out to the track and you have women and men in a class, you'll tend to see that the men will go out and like do this crazy fast lap and then crash and burn, as they're learning, and it's this, just like, I will, it broke. Well, I'm going to build it and make it better to where it can accommodate my, like I'm the next Mario Andretti. I'm just waiting to prove it. And women will tend to start and learn and take the information in, take the coaching in, and kind of come a little more linear and improve, take that coaching, continue to improve. I'll see a little plateau, and then they have a breakthrough and continue. Where So it tends to be like this or like this with women. And then they keep going. And the men tend to be a little more like this. They both get to the same place. But the women tend to break the equipment a little bit less. But they don't necessarily learn how to fix the equipment. You know, I've seen that in off-road, you know, because they're a little easier on the equipment. They really focus on their driving technique. The men can be a little tougher, a little bit more heavy on the brake and the throttle, break more pieces, learn how to fix it. But, you know, it's going to be very interesting as we see more women competing head to head with men, and then who ends up on the podium. So I don't know, Christina, does anybody have any feedback on that? And by the way, I do want to say that men are usually our biggest cheerleaders for the rally. They're the ones that are so excited. They really push the women in their lives to compete in it. They're encouraging. I hardly hear a negative word. And I really encourage women to take that approach, because I've seen more women say, how can you do that? How can you take that time off? How can you leave your family? Are you sure? Is that a good thing that you should be doing with your time? And I've seen more women actually almost be more negative or less encouraging than I've seen the men. And so I really encourage women to take a step back, and before, you know, questioning, don't be afraid to say, go for it, chase your dreams.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really interesting point about how women in many cases can be a little more naturally cautious. And for a sport like racing, we tend to see that as a disadvantage, but in many cases, strategically, it's not. Certainly in terms of what you were saying, where you might be a little more hesitant to go all in, it's a setback, but I'm curious to hear if Renee and Christina, if you guys have experienced that too, where strategically you're just thinking in a different way that is putting you on a different level from the rest of the field.
You want to go ahead, Renee?
Okay, sure. Yeah, and Christina, I don't know how it plays out in your kind of racing. It may be different, but I can say in rally racing, I just think in my experiences as a woman driver that I bring something to the table they don't have and they really need. And it is more of looking at this as a chess game, like you were saying, or as a plan, and executing each turn and not letting this thing that can take over of, what do they call it, the red mist or whatever. You know, I've had guys tell me, don't let the red mist get you. And I'm thinking, what red mist? You know, I don't have that problem. You know, it's more of about executing each turn and improving and staying focused. And I don't have this kind of, since I've raced a lot in Mexico, I got this macho thing that has to take over, and where you sometimes throw everything aside and it's like, and you start becoming irrational, and it becomes more about driven by your emotion or your ego, or you got to win at any cost. And it's not that you don't push, but it's always measured risk. Like, how fast am I going to come into that turn, knowing there's a cliff there? And you have to stay on the road. It's 7 days if you're in Mexico. You've got to get to the finish. So yes, you have to be speed. You have to have speed, but you have to have endurance. You have to get to that final finish. And so constantly measuring that. And I just think we have an ability to be more level-headed and more sensible, even though women are typically characterized as being very emotional. I don't see that in the driving at all. I see we're less governed by those emotions, and we take it more in an analytical, mental way of how to execute and how to achieve. And we can be super successful.
Okay, there's a lot of things that we talked about. I'm going to go into a lot of things here. I would say, first of all, in my racing, I don't see it, but it's also because I am competing with a lot of men that I have a lot of admiration for. They're very good drivers. They're past that point. You know, with some of the things that we're talking about, it is at an earlier stage in your career or in your hobby or whatever it might be, and of how you're treating your driving. But in terms of, you know, women having more of a linear progression, like, and men being, you know, going more up and down, I mean, for me, my experience also with accelerating change or coaching at track days, it's confidence. The guys walk in like, here I am, let's go. And the women are a little bit more hesitant. But our instructors also say that's why the women are such great listeners, because they actually take the input and there's not, you know, they're a bit more open to hearing what the instructor says. You know, the whole aspect of, you know, are the women being questioned whether they can do it or not? I mean, I think this is such a big topic in a lot of ways. It doesn't only translate into driving and racing, it's also career-wise. Like the guys, you know, I think a lot of men are perceived as more confident than women. You know, there's questions such as, you know, if you decide to start a family, you have a kid, you know, plenty of women get the question, oh, are you going to come back, do you think? Like men never get that question. They're never asked if they're going to come back to their job after they have the kid. You mentioned in terms of prioritizing, should you be with your family? Should you be doing things? What should you be doing instead of the hours that you're spending at the track? You know, there's the question like, oh, can she handle all of it? But you never question a man. Like and it's not, I'm not saying it's only men, it's plenty of women asking the same questions. We are a part of the issue also, but I think the whole perception of whether I can do something goes way beyond just being at the track. I think it's a general perception that we're seeing a lot of life cases and scenarios that are taking part all over the world in all sorts of industries, and it's not only related to just being at the track. So I think there's a lot of mindsets that could be affected and changed, and it's also something that you as an individual, if you get the questions, have to know how to navigate. And I think there's a space for developing a skill set like that. And believe it or not, something like that might come in your everyday job, that's applicable at the racetrack. So there's a lot of crossovers no matter what you do in life, I would say. There's a lot of skill sets that I take with me in my other projects that I've learned through racing.
Christina, you bring up something so important. When you're racing at this level where, you know, the people have risen to the top competitors. And that is really important. When you're in amateur rally, or let's say the Baja 1000, where you have a lot of people who, you know, are more pro, but then you have the big part of the field are more amateurs, you know, it's a bucket list thing, or, but when it comes to excellence, and Rod used to always say this to me, only about 10% of the field are really great drivers. You know, at least where in the things that we do, or where you have massive fields, you know, when you get down to where it's 20, 30, 40 cars and something where it's been vetted through, that's different. But excellence is excellence. And excellence is not defined by gender. And you're right, it's confidence. It's competence based on skill, and confidence based on competence. You know, it's based on skill. It's
hopefully
being
oh.
There's, you know,
they don't have the competence.
But what did you say? Because I've learned the hard way that just because somebody is super confident does not mean that they're competent.
Well, that's what it is. It's confidence, it's confidence rooted in competence. Yeah. And confidence without competence is just unbridled ego. But that is not gender specific. You give, when you look at the top ranks in anything, it is not about gender. It is about a set of internal qualities and this compass that, you know, this internal compass that guides you, and this capability and, you know, determination and hard work. And I think that you're right, Christina, what's going on right now, we're moving in such a good direction. You know, there's a lot happening, but boy, you know, the goal is, you know, ladies, you know, who are listening to this, reach for the top. You know, it's not about gender. And those obstacles, and Christina said something earlier when you guys asked us to consider obstacles that have been in our way. You know, I've never really felt obstacles. I've just seen, I love obstacles. I love somebody to tell me I can't do something. Like, that's the best thing that I can hear. And it's really important to surround yourself with great people. And if you surround yourself with great people, regardless of gender, you know, irrespective of gender, you're going to have less obstacles, because some of the biggest obstacles you'll have are people, and either bad people or people that are not working as hard, who mediocre is okay. It's not about excellence. You strip that away and surround yourself with a great team. That's what I love about racing. It's not just about the driver. It's about the entire team. And that will decrease the obstacles in front of you, period. So that's kind of step one, to make sure that you have the least amount of obstacles in your way.
Absolutely. And those people are so important. Like what you said, if you don't surround yourself in that, especially at the core circle, with people that are 100% positive, willing to take on a challenge, willing to find a way to get through it, a team, having a team mentality and cooperative and all these kinds of things you've described, it's going to be very difficult to find success. But just having people with those right attitudes and those core values and having all those boxes ticked, it is so much easier. It is so much easier to get where you want to go and to have success.
But it's also important to acknowledge that you don't, like, if you can pick, great, but you don't always have the choice. Sometimes you're working for a corporation where you're put into a team, and, you know, there might be some people that you don't get along with. So, you know, pick wisely when you have that opportunity, but, you know, you can also learn how to navigate those situations when you can't pick. And I think,
yeah,
you know, it's, you know, walking away from a situation and, you know, deciding, like, is this like a deal breaker for me, or how can I make the best of it? You know, it's so hard sometimes. I mean, I've also been racing with people who weren't, you know, a good match for me, or where there was, you know, tension or friction, like especially when results aren't produced. A good team, a championship winning team, work together to solve it. But you're not always going to be with a group of people that are going to want to solve it together. Then suddenly it's everyone out for themselves. Like, how am I going to protect my own back? And it is so difficult to do. And I'm also still learning. I'm 30. You know, I'm still learning all of these things. But you got to walk away from it knowing that you did everything you could, knowing that you did your best. I think that's number one. But
yeah,
there's so many aspects that are just like unpredictable situations. You can't know exactly what's going to happen. And it's accept that it's a learning process.
Yeah.
See, that is so true. You can't, that is probably one of the biggest challenges, and probably the biggest challenge that I've experienced is when you know, I'll be a project manager, you know, in my sports marketing company, and I'm kind of said, yes, you can build a team. Oh, except for these legacy people. That was my best friend. You know, that person was in my wedding. You can't, and they turn out to be the toxic person in the organization. Those are really challenging. In fact, I started the Rebel. One of the most exciting things I had the opportunity to do was build the team that I wanted. So I really do have the dream team. But the second somebody, and I empower our leads, that I don't just say, I'm picking the team and here you go. Because I had to learn that the hard way. Wow, they were, maybe I thought they were right, but maybe not for that lead in this area. And so I had to kind of take a dose of my own medicine. And it's really a really wonderful thing when you can walk in and say, thank you so much for your time. It's been great, but it's time to go. Like now, not in 15 minutes, in 5 minutes, so that the organization doesn't, one person can take down an organization.
Absolutely.
But it's really challenging. So Christina, I'm 55. And so and I'm still learning this. So if you have any really good tactics for when dealing with those challenging people, challenging moments, I do agree with you though. Sometimes you just need to step away, not engage, but it's really challenging, and every situation is different. I think having some years helps, you know, that's helped me. But that will always be hard. That will just always be hard. But you learn the most when it's hard, right?
I learned walking away from a situation when I approached somebody who helped me understand how do I handle this situation moving forward. And I think the most valuable lesson was like, you know, if it isn't about you, If it isn't, know who you are, know what you bring to the table, know what your values are, value yourself. And if whatever the other person is throwing at you, give the ball back. Like if it's not, it's not targeted at you, learn how to analyze and understand and read people. Understand who they are, where the comments are coming from. Are they generally directed towards you? Is this a person who's projecting their insecurities? Analyze the situation, look at it a little bit more logically and analyze it rather than reacting with emotion.
Absolutely.
And I think emotions are still important. I'm a passionate person. I can get fiery. Like I'm better than I was a couple of years ago. But passion is important for what you do and to keep you going and to keep your drive. But yeah, like being analytical and understanding and reading situations correctly. And that's why I'm saying, like, I've always teach you like a learning experience, because what was the conclusion of your analysis and how would you do it differently next time? Because I mean, it goes back to driving, right? Like I come back to a racetrack and I'm like, oh, I remember the car used to step out like this here, had a little bit of oversteer here. How did I correct it? How did I catch it? And that becomes something that you practice and you use, and I use it every time I'm on a track. But the people side is also important, and that's what translates to every industry. And yeah, you got to break it down. You got to go through those different analysis, projections, whatever it might be, that what is going to happen. Also think about the consequences. What consequences are there from the decisions that I make? How is that going to affect myself? How is it going to affect other people? So pros and cons list, making sure you're mentally in the right headspace for you, and understand what is causing the situation. Is it you or is it somebody else? Is it your ball to grab or is it somebody else then you can give it back to?
Yeah, we actually teach that in rally training, that when there are two people in the car, take 100% of responsibility for the mistake. So meaning you need to go back in, and even though that person may have made the manifestation of the mistake, two people influenced that situation to create the mistake. So if you take 100% ownership, you look inside, you go, what could I have done differently to prevent it? It's better to prevent a mistake. Or what could I have done, as part of this team? And then hopefully that helps your teammates want to do the same analyzation, or analysis. And then nobody's pointing fingers, because getting into finger pointing, especially in racing, you don't have time. But that's really toxic. It doesn't work when both people, though, aren't willing to do that. But that is something that we teach is evaluate it, take 100% of the responsibility, talk about what you could have done differently, and then agree on how you're not going to make that same mistake again. Because you can't keep making those same mistakes.
Yeah, but then you're also solution focused.
Yes.
You're not focusing on figuring about the problem. Like we agree there's a problem, and then you're working, you're solution focused.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing is to always remember, what is the goal of that, whatever you're doing, what is that objective and what is that goal? And how do we achieve that goal? And so sometimes you're going to bite your tongue. Sometimes you're going to, you just have to have every tool in your box to figure out the solution for whatever's thrown your way. And the personal part of it is massively challenging. Cars are going to break. It's mechanics. Things happen. Those are simple problems. At least for me, it seems to be the more simple thing. But the thing between human to human and the dynamics of the people is the most challenging part. And you just have to learn different ways to navigate through whatever comes your way and all the kinds of things you've described to get to the goal. With your head held high, with knowing you've done the right thing, you've been a decent individual, you've respected those people in your team, and you've respected yourself to get to that goal.
Well, Renee, I love that you bring up that, it is very simple sometimes in racing. Sometimes you're doing well, you're winning, sometimes you're not, sometimes the car is not working, and there are all these challenges. So as we start to wrap up here, I just wanted to hear from you guys your final thoughts on what keeps you motivated, through those challenges, and what your takeaway would be to women who are looking for ways to be motivated in the way that you guys are.
Anybody want to go ahead?
Yeah, anyone could start.
Go ahead, Christina.
You're asking what keeps me motivated and what keeps me going and what drives me forward, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think a lot of people have a passion, but they're also aware that it's not always that your passion can bring you an income and you can live by it. So it's about combining what gives you the life that you desire and gives you something that you spend your everyday on. I think it's important to always find something within your job or something that you do that you're passionate about, because, you know, you spend a lot of hours during the day doing that. So I think that's going to be a massive part of what you should be focusing on. And yeah, I mean, I've been super lucky. I've gotten to drive race cars and drive so many cars that are part of, you know, people's dreams, like Aston Martin, Ferraris, Porsches. And, you know, I'm looking on how I can be a part of bettering the industry and getting some of my viewpoints across and what I think would be important now that I've lived in it for quite a few years. I hope to be a part of it for many years forward. There's so many different roles that you can take, and I'm excited to keep developing and seeing where I'll end up in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years.
Great, thank you. Emily, any last thoughts?
A couple of things. Christina talked about passion. I mean, we're passionate about it. Aren't we so fortunate we get to do this?
Yeah, extremely, but it's rare.
Yeah, and it's fun. You know, I have fun. I am passionate about it. And some days it's level 2 fun, you know, where it's not fun in the moment, but when you look back, you know, because it's really hard, but it's fun when you look back. My father also gave me some really good advice right before he passed away a couple of years ago. He said, you only have this one go round. You know, seize every day. Don't take it for granted. Enjoy it. But do it the way you want to, because every day is passing. And so the other thing that happens is on those days where it's really rough and I go, oh gosh, I now have to get another permit and the insurance just went up again and all these things. You know, I'm fortunate that I get to go out and set a course on the most beautiful terrain in the world. And that inspires me. But then I get a letter from a woman who's competed and tells me how they got a new raise at work because of what they did in the Rebelle, that they were noticed in a way they weren't noticed before. They left and got out of a abusive relationship because of the strength that they gained, the friendships that they built that they needed at a time in a dark moment, and how this rally is so important to them. So, you know, I have the other components of my work, and those other components helped give me the skills to launch and to produce the Rebelle Rally. But when you get those kind of letters, it makes every single tough moment of producing this particular program worth every second of it. And you also, we just can never forget to laugh. You know, I'm not curing cancer out there, but I sure am having fun. And having fun is really important. And I think that also keeps me going. You know, I hope I can do this when I'm 90.
That's great. That's great. Well, you know, unlike you, Christina, this is not a profession where I'm earning a living, right? I took, you know, we had success in this race and we kept making history in this event. And I realized that when people found out what we were doing with the car and what was being achieved, that they would say, you're doing what? And you're in what? And there was this attention of having their ear. And I got so much out of racing, and I got to this place where I can't do this anymore. It can't, if it's only for me. We would go and we would take things for the kids in Mexico, and we would do things for orphanages and do everything we could when we were down at the race to have an impact on people in that culture. but it was always this yearning and this knowing as I want to do more, I want to do more, how can we do more? And when I realized that there was a voice, that I had a voice, I said, how can I use this voice bigger, have more impact? And realized that the car and what was being done with that car was so unique that that was really the vehicle to have a voice and have an impact to affect change around the world. And that's how we decided to make this massive goal. And I got into the, we're going to do this. Sometimes you set these goals for yourself and you have no idea the cost, the time, the energy, the pitfalls, the hurt, all the stuff that is going to take to achieve that goal. So we started it out. It's like, okay, we're going to take this car. We're going to put it in the most extreme environments, the most extreme races, take it places it's never been before in events, and do all these big things, and do this on every continent. And it's like, yeah, we're going to do this, and realizing this is a hard thing, but realizing that doing that, we would have an opportunity to have a bigger voice and have a bigger change. And sitting here, we started that in 2017, and we're sitting here now, and we've had success in doing that. And to me, that is so rewarding. And what you were saying earlier is, I want to be able to do this until my last breath, and it's about living life not for me, and it's for those that need and that are needed. And what we focused on are kids that are being trafficked, and it's primarily sex trafficking, millions of kids. And having an opportunity to raise now almost $600,000, and knowing that because our racing has sponsored all that money that we're giving to prevent kids from being trafficked, and rescue kids that are being trafficked, and then rehabilitate them, and then opening the door for me actually getting to go down and being involved in investigative work and doing rescue work, teeing it up for law enforcement, talking to traffickers, meeting with kids that are being trafficked, seeing trafficked kids on someone's phone that they're selling, and having all this come out of racing, all this come out of one day I'm going to race a car, and thinking it was just going to be a one-off, and having this whole turn in life. And so.
But that's amazing. I mean, you set yourself up, even before you were behind the wheel, you set yourself up with the life that you created. And this led to you being able to pursue a passion that generated another passion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they all sort of came together. So when we wanted to grow our voice, I had this exposure to FBI guy, and then sitting next to a guy with a pornographic image of a child. So all these things, it was meant to be. And knowing that this is a path that was set before me, and to know that you're in that path and you're stepping in that path. And it's super tough, and all the things that we've talked about. And then, but it's massively inside. There's so much that we get, right? When you give the most, you get the most. And having that experience in life is such a blessing and such something to be treasured. And that when you get to have that experience, it's the most amazing part of living, right? So super thankful. I know we all have our different stories and our paths and what we're doing, but each one of them is doing something to empower and help other people in a different expression, in a different way. What you're doing, Christina, what you're doing with your rally, and it's really cool. You're not just doing your job, but you found that this is a way and a means that you can actually go affect change in other people's lives. And that's what makes it so meaningful. And a story that needs to be told, and you're giving us that opportunity this morning. So yes, it's super cool. Great to be with you guys.
The opportunity.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for being here. Renee, I'm glad that we got the chance to talk about your philanthropic work before we go. I think that's really inspiring. I think that Christina and Emily, what you guys are doing as well, is so inspiring for me and for other women. So thank you.